for the stream, so just hang tight. Check, check. Testing. Okay, awesome. Sounds like we're good to go. So welcome, everyone. Definitely feel free to continue to get food, go back and get more food and drinks. You won't interrupt anything. My name is Miranda Provance, and I'm on the leadership team of Springfield Women in Technology, and my day job is at Mostly Serious, where I lead a team of developers. We craft beautiful and functional websites. We are so incredibly excited to share our results with you tonight. Before we get into the meat of things, though, today, I want to explain who Springfield Women in Technology is, as well as highlight our amazing partners and sponsors. So, Women in Tech is here to elevate, engage, and empower local women and gender minorities in the local tech community. We do this through quarterly programming, and now for the first time ever, through research. I also want to highlight that we serve women in all areas of tech, from traditional development and IT roles to design, project management, and more. It takes all of us to create compelling tech, so we want to be that community resource for everyone. We are incredibly grateful to our presenting sponsor, STC, Springfield Tech Council, not only for providing significant financial support to us in this endeavor, but also for planning and promoting alongside us every step of the way. Our community is incredibly lucky to have STC because they exist to unify and amplify the professional tech community in the Ozarks. We are also incredibly grateful for the support provided by all of our sponsors, and we specifically want to recognize CNH Industrial, Bass Pro, SRC, and Jack Henry. Could we get a round of applause for our sponsors? Thank you. So anyone who has spent any time in tech can see the lack of diversity in the field. But what I love about our community is that every single tech leader I've spoken to is aware of the issue and is anxious to do something about it. Issues with diversity don't often have easy answers, and I know that many allies want to help but don't know how. So our goal with this study is to make actionable change as easy as possible. With this report, we hope that business leaders and recruiters have the tools and the data they need to help attract and retain diverse talent. So digging a little bit deeper into the why, this report will help employers increase diversity in organizations and teams, attract and retain more local talent to better compete with remote employers, improve benefits and policies for women and gender minorities, and finally, to better support tech employees with families. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Paige Oxendine is a consultant with Habitat Communication and Culture and has been actively involved in this research project over the last several months. She is an advocate for women in the workplace, having previously co-founded Rosie, a local organization focused on supporting women in business and leadership. She's very excited to walk us through the research findings tonight and for our local employers to have great local data they can begin to use in their decision-making when it comes to how we support a diverse tech workforce. Please join me in welcoming Paige Oxendine.
Okay, thank you so much, Miranda. I am going to give Levi 1 second to hop up here and change our camera view because I told him I was likely to want to stand over here in the middle, and hopefully all of our virtual friends who are watching the live stream can hear me okay through the microphone, and Levi, I'll lean on you if any of that changes at any point in time. But as Miranda said, my name is Paige Oxendine, and I'm a consultant with Habitat Communication and Culture. Want to take a really quick second and point out that we also have Dr. Spencer Harris, Habitat co-founder, here in the room with us this evening, so that's half of our team. You may also know Jared Johnson, Habitat's other co-founder, or Alex Scrivey, who who is our client champion, and hello, Alex, who, as I understand, is watching the live stream right now. But our team was so excited and frankly honored to have the opportunity to work alongside Women in Tech and the Springfield Tech Council to do this research. Two organizations that, as you just heard from Miranda, are doing really incredible work in our community. And so if you are here tonight and yourself or your employing organization is not currently involved with Women in Tech and or with the Springfield Tech Council, I would encourage you before you leave here tonight to connect with Miranda, to connect with Emily. I know after I wrap up, Miranda's going to come back and have some ways in which people can start to plug in, and I would really encourage you to do so before you leave here tonight. But what we're here to talk about tonight, as Miranda mentioned, is the findings of our research project. And so what we did was we took a look at what it's like to be a tech worker living here in Southwest Missouri, and specifically, what are the ways in which it's meaningfully different to be a woman or a gender minority working in tech as compared to be a man working here in tech in our community. And I want to see a real quick show of hands from those of you who are here in the room with us who would consider themselves to be a tech worker in some form or fashion. Okay, the majority of the room, that's awesome, you're in the right place. Who here manages in some capacity a tech team or has supervisory responsibility for tech folks on your team? Okay, again, a lot of you. Anyone here who works in HR? Okay, all right, so we have the perfect audience here in the room tonight for everything that we're going to talk about. When we sat down to launch this research project, we knew, this was through conversations with WIT, conversations with the Tech Council, we knew that when we got back together tonight to talk about these findings, we wanted to be able to answer a series of questions, okay? We wanted to be able to say, what benefits do local tech workers have? What benefits do they want? And are there meaningful differences in terms of how men and women in our local tech workforce interact with and prioritize the benefits that their employers offer to them? We also wanted to know, what is it, if I'm a tech worker here in our region, that makes a job desirable? If I'm thinking about why I have my current job or what I might look for if I'm out in the job market, what is it that makes a job attractive? And again, are there differences between what women would say to that question and what men might say to that question? We also wanted to know, what does it look like to interact with professional development and other development opportunities as a tech worker here in our region? What opportunities are available to you? And again, do men and women interact with those opportunities differently? And lastly, we wanted to explore what we consider to be some of the socio-emotional elements of the workplace. Frankly, what's it like to be part of a tech team? How embraced do we feel as a tech worker here in Southwest Missouri? And so luckily we got answers to all these questions, I'm very excited to say, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we have 5 chapters that we're going to work through. We're going to start off with a research overview. We're going to finish up with a series of takeaways or recommendations for employers. And between the two of those, we're going to take a look at what I just talked about. We're going to look at what we learned about benefits. We're going to look at areas in which men and women actually had largely the same thing to say about being a tech worker here in Southwest Missouri. And probably most importantly tonight, we're going to take a look at the areas in which the biggest differences emerged between our male and female research participants. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started with an overview of this. I want to make sure, let me know if this cuts out, that you understand how we came to have the data and the insights that we're going to be talking about for the rest of our conversation here tonight, okay? So our research program consisted of 3 different components. And the very first thing we did after kicking off this project and outlining those key learning objectives with WIT and the Tech Council was a pretty extensive literature review. Meaning we sat down and took a look at, frankly, what is already a lot of data in this space. There's a lot of existing research about tech workers and their preferences and their motivations. And there's a considerable amount of research out there about what it's like to be a woman in tech. There's been a lot of emphasis on getting more women into the tech workforce nationally and globally, especially in recent years. And so we took a look at all of that data so it could help inform the rest of our process. Now, the second thing that we did was we launched and developed a pretty extensive electronic survey. And we received more than 360 responses from regional tech workers. So everyone who took our survey lives here in Southwest Missouri, and just like many of you who raised your hands earlier, considers themselves to be a tech worker in some capacity. Who in here took the survey or thinks they took the survey, right? Okay, most of you. Thank you. We appreciate that. It went a long way in allowing us to do this research. I know it was a lengthy survey, so I appreciate your patience, and it really does make a huge difference as we set out to answer those really important questions. And the last thing that we did, kind of the third leg of the stool of our research program, was we sat down in focus group conversations with a dozen local women who, again, work in the tech space. And what we did during these conversations was use these focus groups as an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper with these women, to gain a richer understanding of what it's like to be a woman working in tech, and to pull on some of the questions and the themes that we were exploring in that electronic survey. And so this is what we did, and I want to tell you a little bit more about who we heard from, so you can start to paint a picture in your mind of what these survey respondents look like. Maybe they look like yourself, maybe they look like someone you know. So you can see we've got gender data over here on the left half of the slide, and we've got age data over here on the right half of the slide. So the bulk of our survey respondents are 44 years old or younger, okay? And in fact, the largest category of respondents were those folks who tell us they're somewhere between 25 and 34 years old. So a lot of what we would consider to be early to mid-career tech professionals here in the region. This is largely who we heard from. Now, we also know, Miranda's already mentioned, tech is not a field with 50% women and gender minorities, right? Okay, women and gender minorities are outnumbered in the tech workforce. But what we were really thrilled to see is that for this particular research effort, we did in fact have nearly 50% of our survey responses coming from women and gender minorities who work in tech and live right here in our region. And this is fantastic because what it allowed us to do on the back end when all this wrapped up and we started to review the data, we had a really quality data set where we could pull these two things apart and say, what are the ways in which men and women and gender minorities feel the same about working in tech in Southwest Missouri, and what are the ways in which they feel meaningfully different from one another. And that's, again, a lot of what we're going to talk about as we continue to move through this tonight. We also wanted to know, how much do these folks earn, right? Tech kind of has a stereotype or an association with it. If you ask many people, they say, oh, if you work in tech, you probably make a lot of money, right? And the folks who we surveyed are certainly high earners, definitely higher than what we see in terms of regional average wages, okay? In fact, the largest category of respondents tell us that they are making 6 figures a year. They're making somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 a year. And another 16%, if we were to combine these bottom two lines here, tell us they're making over $150,000 a year. Okay, so these are, again, folks who are early to mid-career, could be men, women, or gender minorities, and they're likely earning somewhere around the 6-figure mark, okay? And this is the portion of the evening where we go around one by one and everybody tells me how much money they make, right? Okay, ready? We're gonna start over here. No, but just know that these folks typically are high earners. And we're gonna come back, we're gonna talk more about regional earning data in a later portion of the presentation. So just keep this slide in mind. After learning a little bit more about what people take home individually as tech workers, we said, okay, well, tell us a little bit more about the nature of your role. Are you entry level within your organization? Have you maybe moved up through the ranks and now you're in management? Like many of you said, you're overseeing teams, you're supervising folks. And what we see is that the bulk of our survey respondents have certainly moved up within their organization, but not necessarily on that management track. In tech, a lot of people pursue what they call that individual contributor track. And so most of the people who we heard from tell us that they are either an intermediate or a senior level individual contributor. So think about job titles like senior software engineer or senior product manager. Those are the types of roles that these survey respondents tell us they have currently here in our region. One of the last things we wanted to know about folks after they divulged how much money they make and what their job titles are is we said, where do you spend your working hours? Are you fully remote, working from your home office all day, every day, all the way to are you always in the office with virtually no options to work from anywhere else? And you can see this 100% remote option was our most popular option. This is what most people tell us they're doing. And our second most popular option, this was interesting to me, wasn't to be mostly remote, but in fact to be mostly in office. So we have a lot of people who are telling us they're working fully remote. They're earning around 6 figures. They are likely intermediate or senior on their team and within their organization. Okay, are you starting to kind of paint a picture of who we're talking about here? And I don't know about any of you, but I'm guilty occasionally when I hear about a tech worker who lives here in our region and works fully remote, and these are even people who I know, I say, oh, well, they must be working for someone who doesn't even have any type of local presence or local tie, right? These are remote employees. Maybe they're working for Google, they're working for Apple, they're working for Meta, you name it, they're making 6 figures. And I want to very quickly disqualify that for a moment. Because while we heard from people that they are working mostly from home, 83% of our survey respondents tell us that their employer does in fact have a physical office presence, either here in the Springfield metro, or maybe in the Joplin metro, or maybe in both of those communities, in addition to potentially other communities. And so we're not hearing exclusively from folks who live here in Springfield, work fully remote for these large multinational organizations. Many of them are working fully remote while their employer may have their name, on the outside of a building just a couple of blocks away or on the other side of town. And so again, think about someone who is early to mid-career, likely under the age of 44, high earner here in our community, certainly earning higher than average wages, senior or intermediate in their role, working fully remote, but for a company that does have a local presence, okay? Are you starting to kind of identify either personally or maybe somebody you know in your network who fits this profile, right? We asked just a couple of questions, not about survey respondents themselves, but about the organizations they work for, so we could learn a little bit more about their employers. One of the questions we asked was, how many people work for this organization? And you'll see the bulk of our survey respondents work for, frankly, what I would consider to be pretty large organizations, 500 plus, right? Large, enterprise level almost employers is what we're hearing from. Very few people tell us that they're working in these smaller shops, smaller teams, mom and pop, local footprint style. The next thing we asked to gain a better understanding of where these folks work is, okay, let's talk a little bit about your employer's customer base. When you're selling goods and services, does this activity happen primarily locally, like very small radius of business activity, all the way up through regional, national, and all the way to international? And you'll see most of the people who responded to this survey say, I work for a national company. The company I work for, while they're likely to have an office here, and they're likely to allow me to work fully remotely, we're selling goods and services to people all over the United States. Okay, so this gives you an idea, again, of who we heard from as we start to now take a look at what we heard when we first asked about benefits. And like I mentioned, and we were talking about those key learning objectives that we wanted to be able to answer, when we talked about benefits, leading up to this research, we wanted to know really 3 things. What types of benefits do local tech employees have available to them through their employer? What types of benefits do local tech employees wish they had available to them through their employer that they don't have access to today? And are there any meaningful differences in either of those answers between men and women? And so what we did was we started with a list of 12 different workplace benefits that an employer might offer to someone. And we asked all of our survey respondents, tell us out of all of these, which, if any, are available to you today. Okay, so there was a list of 12. And there was actually a perfect break between half and half. There were 6 benefits that you see on the slide here that rose to the top. These are the benefits that 75% or more of all survey respondents say, yes, I have that available to me today through my employer. And these are probably the things, frankly, if you were to ask me to list off 5 or 6 workplace benefits that would come to mind first for me as well. Things like retirement contributions, things like employer-sponsored health care, things like paid time off or vacation. These are the types of things that most tech workers here in our region have access to through their employer today. Okay? The secondary swath of benefits, again, the six that fell to the bottom half of that list, are those that you see here. And the number of people who have those benefits available to them is what you see indicated in blue on these pie charts. And if we start in the upper left and we move down to the lower right, you'll see that the number of people who have those benefits just continues to decrease, okay? So less than 75% of local tech workers tell us they have remote opportunities available to them as a benefit through their employer. And the singular benefit that the fewest number of local tech workers have available to them is profit sharing, okay? So this just continues to decrease from remote opportunities all the way down to profit sharing. This is the stuff that fewer and fewer people have here in our region. But the next thing we wanted to know is, what are the benefits that local tech workers wish they had? What are the things that we're not checking the box on today that we wish we could check the box on and say, man, it'd be awesome if my employer made that specific benefit available to me? And what you'll see over here, if you remember the previous slide with these pie charts, the 4 pie charts that fall to the bottom that the fewest people have, things like paid parental leave, wellness perks, stock options, and profit sharing, are then the same 4 things in almost exactly the reverse order that local tech employees are telling us they wish they had available through their employer. I wish I had profit sharing opportunities. I wish I could unlock stock options, right? I wish there were paid parental leave made available to me, and I wish I had access to some type of wellness perk or credit, okay? So these are the things that local employees don't have today, but wish their employer would make available. So we've answered those first 2 questions that I talked about. What do people have? What do people wish they have? And I said the third thing we wanted to know about benefits is, what are the differences between men and women, okay? What are the different priorities? Are women saying they want one thing and men are saying they want something else? And the thing that became really clear when we dug into all of the data about benefits is that men and women had virtually the exact same things to say, okay? So men and women who are working in tech today here in Southwest Missouri largely have access to the same benefits, those 6 things that we talked about. They have, for the most part, employer-sponsored healthcare, dental, vision, retirement contributions, paid time off, professional development opportunities. Men and women alike have access to those things. Men and women alike, in fact, in this same order, tell us that they want these same things. Okay, so I don't want anyone to be confused for a moment and think, well, men probably want profit sharing and women want wellness perks. These are the things that everyone agrees upon as priorities for what we wish we had available through our employers. Okay, largely had the same thing to say when we asked about benefits. There was a whole other set of issues where men and women had the same thing to say. It wasn't just when we talked about benefits that we saw a lot of commonalities emerging in the data. And so what we're going to do now is take a look more specifically at 3 other areas where, again, people largely had the same preferences and the same experiences. These are in terms of job satisfaction, job appeal, or what makes a job desirable, and lastly, we're going to talk about feelings of self-doubt. Again, these are things in which men and women had very similar things to say. Let's look first at job satisfaction, or a sense of job engagement. And when we looked at the questions that we asked around how satisfied and how motivated and how committed are you at work, men and women had largely the same things to say, and good news for all of us here in the room today, especially our HR managers, had generally positive things to say. Okay? So one of the first things we asked is, overall, are you satisfied with your job today? And you can see women who work in tech in Southwest Missouri, 69% say yes, 71% of men say yes. And so we're only a couple of degrees apart here. Very, very closely aligned when considering how satisfied tech workers in our region are with their current job. Not a very meaningful gap here. What is interesting to know is that according to the most recent data from PwC's survey earlier this year, Tech workers, whether they are men or women here in our region, are trending a couple of points ahead in terms of satisfaction scores when compared to tech workers globally. And so that's interesting to know and kind of a feather in the cap for all of our local employers and our local tech workers that generally we're a little bit more satisfied than people are globally. But men and women here in our community who are working in tech typically are satisfied at fairly even rates when they consider their current job. If we think about job engagement, it's typically a combination of satisfaction, motivation, and commitment. And so after asking about satisfaction, we said, okay, let's take a look at how motivated tech workers here in our region are to give their best at work every day. And again, you'll see scores between men and women that are within just a couple of points here. We've got women who are edging out the men just barely when saying, yes, I am motivated to show up every day, to give some discretionary effort. I really want to give my best. And so again, very, very close scores when considering how motivated our tech workforce is, and generally pretty positive scores, 75%. The last question in terms of workplace engagement is around commitment, okay? And you'll see again, scores between men and women that are only a couple of points apart. And we've flipped here now back to where we were with the satisfaction score where men are ahead just a little bit. And I want you to put a pin in this because we're going to talk more about commitment a little bit later on. So let's all just remember that while the scores are relatively close for commitment between men and women locally who are working in tech, women are just a little bit behind here, okay? Women are slightly less committed to their current organization than their male peers are, okay? The last question we asked around job satisfaction was to try to get a sense of how folks would evaluate their current work-life balance. Do you have a good work-life balance? Do you have margin, as many people refer to it as? You have time to take care of yourself and your friends and your family for hobbies and wellness and all these other things that we all want to integrate into our life. You'll see scores again, very, very close, within just 2 points of one another, with men slightly in the lead saying, yeah, I have, a pretty decent work-life balance. I'd love to see both of these scores be a little bit higher, and I imagine managers and HR managers would like to see these scores be a little bit higher as well. But the takeaway here is that men and women really don't have a lot of discrepancy when we ask about their work-life balance. They're largely telling us the same thing, okay? And so this is how things really are shaking out to be pretty similar between men and women so far, especially when we ask about job satisfaction. The second area where men and women had pretty similar things to say was when we asked about what makes a job attractive. We wanted to gain a better understanding as to what was it that led you to take your current job, to accept your current job and stay in your current job, and what are the kinds of things that you would be evaluating if for any reason you found yourself looking for a new job today? What's most important to you? And again, really wanted to see if there were differences between men and women, but we're in our commonality section, and so we heard the same thing from folks. Salary between men and women was the single most important factor when we asked folks, why did you choose your current job? Okay? And remember, we've talked about earning data a little bit already. We're going to talk about earning data a little bit more in just a minute. But folks in this field are earning quite a bit, okay? And that's important to them. Salary was the number one reason why people told us they have accepted their current job and are staying in their current job. But like I said, we also wanted to know, okay, well, let's say if for any unforeseen circumstance you were to find yourself looking for a new job today, what would you be prioritizing? There are a lot of factors to consider if we find ourselves looking for a job. And this is a 5-point scale. So 5 is the highest possible score that any one of these things that you see listed here could have received. And what's at the very top? Salary. Over 4, close to 4.2, 4.3. Okay, so the clear winner here, if you were to consider future employment, the number one factor is salary. What I do want to pull on a little bit more is if we look at items number 2 and items number 3 on this list. Because I think often, as employers, what we do when we start thinking about how to market our jobs, how to talk about our workplace as a destination for employees to come and join our team, we talk about salary or compensation, and we talk about benefits right? And offering benefits to employees is a lot of the associated cost of employing folks, right? Providing health care, covering those sorts of things. There's a tremendous cost to employers to do that kind of stuff. And we often talk about all of that together and say, we're such a fantastic place to work. Here is the salary. Here are all the benefits you receive if you come work here. And what we're hearing from men and women in our local tech workforce is that, yeah, benefits are great and they're certainly important, but they're actually not as important as remote and flexible work opportunities, okay? And so if we think about things that can make our organization more attractive to potential employees, and we think about the cost associated with these things, again, benefits are important, people have to have them, but what does it cost us to find ways to offer remote and flexible working opportunities? And to know that that's actually evaluated and considered more important than the benefits themselves, okay? So something for local employers to think about. Salary clearly number one, again, between both men and women, but they're telling us that the opportunity to work from home or to have some sort of otherwise flexible arrangement is more important than anything other than salary, and it does in fact outrank benefits. We heard this from a survey participant. We have a quote here. This is a direct quote that says, "The best part about my current job is what I make and the fact that I can work from home." Okay, again, those top two things. And you see, I also have this option to travel while working. We heard this quite a bit. Home is where the Wi-Fi is, right? Tech employees, want the option to work remotely. They want to work from home, they want to work from a coffee shop, they want to work from a Sprinter van, and the benefit, the availability of that is in fact more important than traditional benefits such as PTO or retirement contributions. The third and final way in which men and women felt the same when we asked about their workplace experiences is when it came to experiencing feelings of self-doubt, otherwise known as imposter syndrome. I'm going to ask a show of hands if you all are willing to be vulnerable with me for a moment. Who here, whether you work in tech or not, has ever experienced imposter syndrome, right? Virtually all of us. Thank you. I'm so thankful for your willingness to indulge me and to be honest in this moment, because we don't talk about this a whole lot, right? I think we're talking about it more and more, but historically we've not been really open about these moments in which we just don't really feel like we're all that qualified, despite the fact that we have the education, we have the years of experience, and we absolutely deserve to be in the room. And it was interesting to see that it's not just women feeling this way, and it's not just men feeling this way, it's everyone feeling this way. The scores here are identical. Nearly 80% of men and women tell us that they have experienced feelings of self-doubt or imposter syndrome during their time in the tech industry. Okay, and we heard a lot about this in focus groups with women. Tech is an industry that is characterized by constant changes, constant evolution. There's always a new platform, a new language, a new framework, right? And what we hear from people is, the more I learn, the less I feel like I know. Because this world of tech and everything associated with it just continues to open up. And so even as we're learning stuff, we're still saying, man, I'm just never gonna know all of it. I don't know if any of you have seen the meme. I saw it just recently, and it's a woman in her thought bubble. She's like staring off into the distance, and she says, am I even good enough to have imposter syndrome, right? And so like we have imposter syndrome, and now we have imposter syndrome about whether or not we're worthy of having imposter syndrome. And I don't know if women are talking about this among themselves in the tech space, and I don't know if men are talking about this among themselves in the tech space, but I would probably argue that men and women are not talking to one another about it a whole lot in the tech space. And so if nothing else, I hope you leave here tonight and you know that you're not alone, and you're not all that different from your male or female peers. In fact, that we are all feeling a deep sense of imposter syndrome at work. So to quickly recap the ways in which men and women had largely the same things to say and demonstrated the same preferences outside of benefits, which we've already chatted about, men and women who work locally in tech have largely the same rates of job satisfaction. So if we think about satisfaction, motivation, commitment, and work-life balance, we're hearing very similar things from men and women alike. They also agree unanimously on what makes a job attractive. why they chose their current role, and the things they would focus on if they were to be looking for a new role today or tomorrow. And the last thing that men and women agree upon universally is that we'll never know it all, right? There's just too much. It changes all the time, despite how many Udemy courses we take, or how many YouTube videos we watch, or how good ChatGPT gets. We're all still trying to figure it out. And so take some comfort in that, I hope. Okay, so those are the ways in which things are alike. But we've talked extensively from the very beginning of kicking things off tonight about we really wanted to uncover the ways in which it's different to be a woman or a gender minority working in tech here in Southwest Missouri. And so we dug into the data, and there were a series of areas around which we found some pretty meaningful differences. And the differences clustered around these 4 things that we're going to talk about next. The first is industry intentions. Secondly, earnings. We're going to go back to that salary slide like I promised. Training and professional development opportunities. And lastly, discrimination and harassment. Okay? So let's talk first about industry intentions, because we wanted to know from men and women, how long do you think you're going to work in tech? Right? You've told us that you're pretty engaged, you're pretty satisfied, you're earning a lot of money in most cases. Is this the kind of thing that you see yourself doing for the long haul? And what we heard, particularly from women, is that they do not plan to stay in tech for the duration of their career. There's a pretty meaningful gap here between male and female survey respondents. You can see over 70% of men say, yep, this is it, I'm gonna be in tech essentially until I retire, while just over half of all the women we spoke to would be willing to say the same thing, right? And I see some of you kind of like twisting your head and be like, that's kind of interesting, right? There's been so much emphasis lately on getting more women into tech, getting more women into STEM. We're working downstream, and there are programs and initiatives in elementary school, to get girls into STEM because we know that we need to bring more women into this industry. But we're hearing here locally that women are saying, I don't know if this is really for me or if this is really for the long haul. At a rate of 2 to 1, here are some of the other things women said about their industry intentions. They were twice as likely as their male peers to say that they are actively looking to leave the tech industry, okay? I want to be very clear here. This doesn't say they're actively looking for a different job or that they are actively looking to leave their current employer. They are actively looking to leave the industry as a whole, okay? This is meaningfully different than what we heard from their male peers. They were also at a rate of 2 to 1 more likely to say that, yeah, I plan to stay for a bit, but I'm definitely open to other opportunities because, again, this is probably not where I'm going to be forever. Very different responses between men and women when we started to ask about industry intentions. Again, despite so much work that's been done, so much conversation about needing to have more diversity in the field, we're hearing from local women that they don't necessarily plan to stay within the industry. And so we wanted to know why. Why are local women significantly more likely than their male peers to say that they plan to leave the tech industry? And those other 3 things that were listed on that slide just a second ago help us understand the answer to that question, okay? So earnings. We're going to talk about earnings and how earnings factor into turnover intentions among women in tech. And what we learned, first and foremost, is that women are earning less, and we also learned that women are less likely to feel as if they're being paid fairly, okay? And we're going to start there with that sense of feeling like we're being paid fairly, pay equity, as you might know it as, okay? So we asked men and women, do you believe you're paid fairly as compared to, and let's be very careful here, others with similar positions, similar degrees of experience within your own organization today, okay? Nearly 3/4 of all the men we spoke to said, yes, I feel like I am paid in a fair and equitable way within my organization compared to people who have similar skill sets and similar years of experience. 58% of women would say the same thing. So we again start to see a pretty meaningful gap here in terms of perception of pay equity. And I don't know, I'd be curious if there's anyone in the room who likes to consider themselves to be a little bit of like a devil's advocate, or you like to poke holes in things, or to borrow a phrase from Spencer, you like to be a wet blanket, talk about the ways in which things are wrong or are just not going to work. Is there anyone who like has that tendency? No? Oh, okay. Tyler, thank you. Yeah, Spencer, of course. Okay, so I know what you might be thinking. You're thinking, well, this is a gut question. This is an intuition question. You're asking people how they feel, right? And I understand, and that's fair. Now, there's a lot of reason why it's worth asking about perceived pay equity, because if you fundamentally perceive that you're not being paid in a fair way, of course that's going to impact your motivation, your commitment, your satisfaction at work. But I hear you, Tyler, wet blanket, okay? And we did. We wanted to dig a little bit deeper, so we had something more than just a feeling to go off of. And again, we had asked people a whole lot of questions about who they were and where they worked and how much money they made, and they largely told us. And so we said, let's just draw a line in the sand in all the survey data. And let's say $100,000 a year. Let's just look at who's making six figures, men and women, okay? More than half of all the men we heard from during this research are making at least $100,000 a year, compared to less than 1/3 of all the women we heard from, okay? So again, this starts to paint the picture of a pretty meaningful gap. I can still see some of you squirming, some of you wet blanketing and saying, but this doesn't account for what? All the things that go into how much we earn. How much education somebody has, right? How much experience somebody has. Maybe what level someone is at. Are they intermediate or are they senior? That could maybe account for this difference, right? But again, we had more data, and so we did dig a little bit deeper. And what you see here on this slide, starting on the left side, is we pulled a profile of like a common survey participant, okay? Let's talk about somebody who tells us, I have a college degree, okay? I have 6 to 10 years of experience in the tech industry, so certainly not a newbie, right? Kind of that mid-career. And I have a senior level job within my organization. Again, I'm a senior PM, I'm a senior solutions architect. These are the types of people that we drew a circle around. And then we split them up. And we said, let's put all the men who fit this profile over here, and let's put all the women who fit this same exact profile over here. People who tell us they have similar degrees, similar years of experience, and similar levels within their organization. And what you see here on the right is the earning data for those folks. And when we split them up, 60% of those women told us they're making less than $75,000 a year. Okay? More than 80% of the men are making more than $75,000 a year. So this starts to paint a much clearer picture that we've moved beyond just feeling like maybe we aren't paid equitably within our organization to maybe, in fact, we have a real pay equity issue here within our local tech workforce, even when we account for education and experience and job level. And so if we start to wonder, why are women telling us, I don't know if this is it for me, maybe there's something else out there beyond the tech industry, this is likely part of the answer. We are going to have time for, I'm going to chat at the end. Thank you very much. Secondly, we asked about professional development opportunities, okay? Because we know that women in particular really want to grow. They are looking for opportunities to expand their skill sets, to learn new things, to advance within their organization. These are some of the things that we heard from women time and time again in focus group settings and in the survey, okay? So women are hungry for development opportunities. But we also know that they are much less likely than their male peers to tell us that they feel like they have good opportunities for professional development and growth within their organization today. So they want this stuff. They want to have mentorship. They want to pursue certifications. They want to pursue technical training. But they're telling us by and large, I just don't really feel like I have the right opportunities available to me within my organization today. Just a little over a quarter of all the women we spoke to. We heard how important it was to them, and then we heard, I don't really have access to it today. The women we spoke to were significantly less likely than their male peers to say, my organization makes these types of things available to me. Things like technical training, pursuing certifications, or tuition assistance to maybe finish a degree that we started years ago, or to go back to school, maybe pursue a master's program. Women are telling us, my organization doesn't offer this. And they're saying their organization doesn't offer it at a rate that is meaningfully different than their male peers. And this tells me something that's kind of interesting, because we don't necessarily think that all the men are working over here in one camp where there are lots of professional development opportunities and all the women are just working at other organizations and there's no crossover, right? In fact, what this stuff often comes down to in the workplace is messaging, okay? Is awareness, is a nudge from a manager or an HR leader to say, hey, don't forget, we have that tuition reimbursement program. It's in fine print on the very last page of your employee manual that we gave you 6 years ago when you started here and that you've probably never once read, right? This type of stuff often is a byproduct of encouraging conversations with leadership. And so the fact that women are significantly less likely to say these things are available to me, again, doesn't mean they work at places where it doesn't exist, but it might mean that their managers and others in leadership aren't necessarily going out of their way to have these conversations with women the way they might be having them with their male peers, okay? And so, again, women are hungry for this type of stuff, but they are telling us they don't really have access to it. One very specific type of professional development that we asked about was mentorship programs, okay? And a majority of women told us, first and foremost, that their current employer doesn't offer a mentorship program. And we said, okay, good to know. Would you be interested in a mentorship program if your employer were to offer one? And you can see here, again, at a pretty meaningful difference, women are saying yes. Nearly 70% of women are saying yes. Sign me up for that. I would, in fact, be interested if my employer were to offer one. But they're telling us even before here, no, my employer doesn't do that right now. So again, maybe their employer truly doesn't. Maybe their employer has it, and it's hidden away, and it's tucked away, and managers are not going out of their way to inform the women on their tech teams about these development opportunities. Okay, but we know it's important to women. So if now we go back to that question, why are local women telling us they're much more likely to leave the tech industry? They're earning less. They don't necessarily feel like they're being compensated in a way that's equitable. They're hungry for development opportunities, and they're telling us that their current employer doesn't necessarily make those opportunities available to them today. The last thing that we're going to talk about here in terms of meaningful differences is a very serious issue, and this relates to discrimination and harassment in workplaces and what we heard from women in our local tech community, okay? And it's probably not going to be a terrible surprise to anyone if you're aware of national data and a lot of stories that circulate about workplace harassment in the tech industry or otherwise, to hear that women told us at a much higher rate that they had experienced some form of discrimination in the workplace and that they were experiencing significant barriers to addressing those issues, okay? So we're going to start with this slide right here that says, have you ever experienced any form of discrimination in your time in the tech industry? And I know I have shown you a lot of charts that look just like this with women on top and men on the bottom and the blue and the red, and there have been differences in terms of how far apart these bars are. This is the slide in the entire presentation deck with the biggest gap between what women and men are telling us. And it's about experiencing discrimination. And we're asking very specifically about experiencing discrimination in the tech industry. So this is not about that job you had in high school where your boss was a real you-know-what, okay? This is about now. This is where you are today as a tech worker in Southwest Missouri. Nearly half, okay, of all the women we spoke to as part of this research checked that box and raised their hand and said, yes, I have experienced at least once some instance of discrimination while I have been part of the tech workforce. Just 16% of men would say the same thing, okay? We heard about this type of thing. We offered up an open field on the survey for folks who were willing to share more, and we did have a survey participant who was willing to share some information with us. And you'll see here, especially for folks who do have that local office presence, maybe we're going in once in a while, some of these inter-office dynamics that can appear that maybe we don't necessarily have as much of on a fully remote team, a whole different set of issues that emerge on a fully remote team around discrimination and harassment. But what we're talking about here are some of these things that if you're maybe the only woman on a team, which we know often in tech there may only be one woman on the team, the sorts of things that you're just expected to pick up, not that you necessarily have particular skill sets or experiences or levels of interest or hobbies that align with these things, but surely you're just supposed to be the one who waters all the plants and organizes the socials and does a lot of these other traditionally female-oriented tasks, okay? So just one small example that somebody was willing to share with us as part of this research. Women were significantly more likely than men to tell us not only that they have experienced some form of discrimination in the workplace during their time in the tech industry, but then once that happens, when it's time to talk about that with our manager, when it's time to consider going to HR, if our company even has an HR department, which is a whole other thing we heard a lot about. In some of those small shops, there's just no HR department even in existence. Women tell us they have faced barriers when seeking support or addressing workplace concerns related to incidents of discrimination. And they tell us that they are either fairly uncomfortable or, frankly, very uncomfortable reporting incidents of discrimination to their employer or to HR, if there is an HR department, okay? So we're experiencing discrimination at a significantly higher rate, and if and when we try to address these concerns, we face barriers and there isn't necessarily a pathway for getting to a resolution, okay? And so, again, if we think about why are local women telling us that they're more likely to leave the tech industry, we start to see a pretty clear picture emerge. Because we've now taken a look at earning data, and we have a sense that women are earning less than their male peers, and they're less likely to feel as if they're being paid fairly within their organization, okay? And they start to wonder, maybe this isn't for me. They're also really interested in training and development. They want mentorship, they want advocates, they want sponsorship, they want to go back to school, they want to pursue certifications. And they're telling us, my employer doesn't offer that. So again, maybe this isn't for me. Lastly, at a meaningful difference, women tell us they're experiencing discrimination in the workplace, okay? And when they experience that discrimination, whether it's once or whether it is a chronic issue, they're telling us that they have faced barriers when they try to address it, and there just isn't really a path. They're wildly uncomfortable trying to address these issues and navigate how we resolve these issues with our manager or with an HR department if we're lucky enough to even have an HR department, okay? This, I know, is difficult data, right? There are some uncomfortable truths in there. And I've seen some of you shifting in your seat, and you're like, oh my gosh, is she done yet? And I didn't mean to bait and switch you, because I know we started off with largely positive and exciting data, and there's definitely good in there, right? And if nothing else, I want us all to remember that, as Miranda said, this is the very first year this survey has been done. Our hope certainly is to continue these efforts in the future, okay? We know there's likely going to be some outcomes of this research, maybe some work groups formed. There's going to be a lot of positive momentum in the community. And the data that we have now from 2023 can be used as a benchmark, right? Moving forward. And we can get back together a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever the case may be, and see the ways in which our local community and our local employers have been able to move the needle on some of these more challenging issues, right? But I do have, before we wrap up, 4 takeaways for employers, because I know you're going to leave here tonight. If you're an HR manager, if you're a business owner, if you're a business leader, you're going to be ready to do something. So we have 4 things that we would encourage you to keep in mind and start to act on. The very first thing I would encourage you to think about if you are an employer is that compensation matters most, right? The true dollars and cents. This is what we heard from men. This is what we heard from women, okay? Benefits are second, flexibility is second, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But at a time when tech workers are in demand and remote working opportunities are more plentiful than ever before, if you are a local employer and you post a job, that job and the corresponding salary are no longer being evaluated by local tech workers against maybe 1 or 2 jobs from other shops here in town, right? We know that tech workers are evaluating those job listings and the corresponding salaries against tons of other jobs, remote opportunities from companies that are located potentially all over the world. And I know it can be really, really difficult to compete with some of those salaries, and there's definitely a threshold there and that companies are going to start to butt up against. But what we have to remember is that compensation matters most, and so employers ought to be doing everything they can to try to stretch every last dollar in order to get and stay competitive for tech talent, okay? The second thing that employers need to be thinking about is prioritizing flexibility. And when we heard about flexibility from folks, this was multifaceted. This is, I want flexibility in terms of when I work, like time of day. I also want flexibility in terms of where I work, in the office, out of the office. Like I mentioned, maybe in a Sprinter van, in a different time zone, in the airport lounge. Tech workers have come to expect, frankly, that this is the type of opportunity that's going to be afforded to them, okay? And people increasingly want more autonomy over their schedules. They want more flexibility in terms of when and where and how they work. And remember that when we ask people to evaluate what is it that makes a job desirable, what would you be considering if you were in the market today looking for a new job, the only thing that was above remote opportunities was salary, okay? Remote opportunities and flexible working arrangements outranked all the other things that we talked to folks about, okay? So this is really, really key, again, along with compensation if we want to attract and retain really qualified tech talent. The third thing that I would encourage employers to consider is how they can focus on enhancing and communicating the available development opportunities, particularly for the women on your teams today and the women who you are hoping to attract onto your teams in the future, okay? So we need to be thinking about, what do our mentorship programs look like? What do our professional development pipelines look like? How do we support people who want to pursue certifications or people who are interested in going back to school? And if we have all this stuff right now, and it's dawning on us that nobody ever asks us about it, or we can't remember the last time anyone redeemed these benefits or started to unlock this stuff, then we likely have a messaging issue, right? Are people aware of the benefits that we have around professional development and learning? How are we communicating that out? And are we making sure that men and women alike are aware of these opportunities? Because women, again, in particular, are very hungry for this stuff. I would say an easy place to start is that mentorship program piece. Fourth and final takeaway for our regional employers, and again, we have to go back to what we talked about when we visited on discrimination and harassment, and the fact that women in our local tech workforce are significantly more likely than their male peers to tell us that they have experienced discrimination in the workplace. Nearly half of all the women we spoke to told us they have experienced at least one instance of workplace discrimination. And so as employers, we have to do better, frankly, and I don't have the magic bullet for you here. That's not the space I work in. If it were the space I worked in, I would be a multi-billionaire and my earnings would be beyond all of the salary data that we talked about at the very beginning, because this is really important stuff and I know so many are struggling with it. But we have to get really serious and really intentional about how we start to address this stuff within our organization, okay? And we also have to make sure that there are very real and very accessible pathways for addressing these things when they do happen, okay? One last thing I'll touch on here is that we also asked a question about, does your employer offer unconscious bias training and diversity and equity and inclusion training? And by and large, people said yes, okay? And I share that with you here at the end to say, that tells me that's not checking the box, right? That's not solving the issue. Because survey respondents told us, yes, my employer offers those things, that's great. We still have a discrimination issue at hand here. And so all of that work needs to continue, but it needs to be augmented by a whole other focus on how we can really root out instances of discrimination, particularly against women in tech. Okay? We have a full PDF of all of this. This is kind of the highlight reel, if you will, of the things we thought you would find most interesting, what we thought would be most meaningful to this audience here tonight. If you take your phone out and scan this QR code, it will take you to the Habitat website where you can download a full PDF of the report. We'd love it if you would download that, if you want to share the link with other people in your organization, people in your network. It's going to stay up here, and of course it's free. It's not going to cost you anything, and so I would encourage you to do so. You can take a closer look at all the data, and again, share that with anyone who you think might find it meaningful. I know Springfield Tech also has the emails from everyone who signed up to be here tonight, and so we can probably even share it out that way if that's easier for all of you, but I would encourage you to do so. And thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Miranda.
Thank you so much, Paige, and definitely to the full team at Habitat for pulling together this important research. We have definitely heard some sobering things this evening, but I want to encourage all of you that there is room to work together for change. We can make it better together. In addition to following up with Paige afterward, if you have any questions, since we didn't leave time for group Q&A, please feel free to reach out to Women in Tech for support or me specifically. We'd definitely be happy to help you figure out what kinds of positive changes you can make in your individual workplaces. There we go. So just want to wrap up with a little bit more gratitude. Definitely thanks again to Springfield Tech Council for all the amazing support, and thank you to all of our sponsors that you see here. And then finally, I really want to thank all of you for being in this room or watching on the video or catching it later. We have a community that cares, and it's super encouraging to be part of this community, and I know that we can make things better together. So lastly, just want to show you a few ways that you can engage with Springfield Women in Tech going forward. You can join us at our next quarterly meeting on January 16th. I believe we're going to do just an open kind of collaborate and talk event at the Mud Lounge, which is just really nice to get together and talk as women about our experiences and what we're working on. Next, we are looking for more people to help with Springfield Women in Tech as event planners, helping with research projects like this, and potentially being on our board as well. As mentioned, we could not have done this without our sponsors. We, paid for really, really quality work, and we need that support going forward if we want to continue this year over year. So definitely encourage businesses to continue sponsorships or sign up for a new sponsorship if you didn't get the opportunity this time. And then finally, follow us online on Facebook, Meetup, and LinkedIn. Thank you all again, and have a great night.